Good evening, and welcome. Tonight, we will step softly backward in time, not with urgency and not with alarm, but slowly, as though turning the pages of an old, well-worn manuscript. Our destination is a small European town in the middle of the 14th century. The streets are narrow. The houses lean gently toward one another, as if sharing secrets across wooden beams. The air is cool, and somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls. We are visiting during a difficult chapter in history, the time of the Black Death. It was an era of uncertainty, of whispered prayers, of closed shutters, and cautious footsteps. And yet, it was also a time of daily routines, of bread baking in communal ovens, of children playing in alleyways, of merchants arranging their wares beneath striped awnings. History, even in its hardest moments, is never only one thing. As you settle in, perhaps adjusting your pillow, letting your breathing slow, imagine yourself stepping carefully through the gates of a medieval town around the year 1348. You are not here to change events. You are only here to observe, to understand the rhythm of lives lived long ago. Tonight, we will begin with the simple, sensory experience of daily survival during the plague. Then, we will drift toward the halls of power in Avignon, where a pope faced impossible decisions. Later, we will explore one of history's strangest mysteries, when people danced uncontrollably in the streets. And finally, we will close inside the quiet safety of a monastery, where routine and prayer formed a steady refuge from chaos. For now, the town gate creaks open, and you step inside.
Imagine yourself waking before sunrise. The room is dim lit only by the faint gray light that seeps through a small, shuttered window. You are lying on a straw mattress. It rustles softly beneath you each time you shift. The air inside the room is heavy, not sharp or shocking, just thick with the scent of damp wood, wool blankets, and last night's cooking fire. You rise slowly. There is no glass in the window, only wooden shutters. You push them open and lean out slightly. Below, the street is already stirring. A cart creaks past, its wheels turning over uneven stones. Somewhere nearby, a rooster calls, and beneath it all is a constant, low murmur, the sound of many lives pressed close together. Medieval towns were crowded places. Homes leaned toward one another across narrow lanes. Upper stories jutted outward, almost touching overhead. Laundry hung between windows. Buckets were lowered and raised by rope. The ground below was not paved in the way we understand it today. It was a mixture of stone, packed earth, straw, and whatever else accumulated there, because there were no modern sewer systems. Waste from households, from animals, from workshops, often found its way into the street. It did not form dramatic rivers, as some later illustrations might suggest, but it lingered. It soaked into the soil. It gathered in shallow channels when it rained. The scent was something residents grew used to, a constant background note, earthy, sour, persistent. You would notice it immediately. And then, perhaps, after a few days, you might begin not to livestock shared the streets. Chickens scratched near doorways. Pigs wandered freely, snuffling at scraps. A neighbor's goat might be tethered to a wooden post. Animals were not distant from daily life. They were woven into it. Sources of milk, eggs, labor, companionship. Now, imagine the bell. It rings from the church tower at regular intervals. In peaceful times, it marks the hours of prayer. It signals weddings, festivals, market days. But during the plague, its tone changes. The bell tolls more often, not hurriedly, not frantically, just steadily. Each toll marks a passing, a neighbor, a baker, a seamstress, someone whose face you recognize. In 1347 and 1348, waves of illness moved through Europe with quiet persistence. Modern historians understand it as bubonic plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, carried in part by fleas that lived on rats. But in the 14th century, there was no microscope, no germ theory, no clear explanation. There were only observations.
Someone falls ill. Fever rises. Swellings appear. Weakness follows. Within days, sometimes less, life is gently extinguished. You would not understand why, and that uncertainty would weigh heavily. Imagine walking through the marketplace. Stalls are fewer now. Some merchants have shuttered their shops. Others stand quietly behind their tables, exchanging goods with minimal conversation. Coins change hands quickly. People step back from one another instinctively, though they do not fully know why. Distance becomes a kind of silent language. You might tie herbs around your neck, rosemary, lavender, believing their fragrance could ward off illness. You might carry a pomander, a small ball filled with spices. The air, you are told, carries sickness, bad air, miasma, and so you breathe shallowly when passing certain corners. Physicians do exist. You might glimpse one in long robes, moving carefully down the street. Later artistic depictions show the famous beaked mask filled with herbs, though such images became more common in later outbreaks. In many towns, doctors wore layered garments, gloves, and hats, protective in their own understanding of the world. Their medicine, however, was limited. They practiced bloodletting. They prescribed herbal mixtures. They consulted ancient texts by Galen and Hippocrates. They spoke of imbalances in the humors, blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. Illness, they believed, came from internal disharmony or corrupted air. Sometimes their treatments comforted. Sometimes they did not help at all. You would likely rely more on family than on physicians. If someone in your household fell ill, you would tend to them. You would bring water. You would cool their forehead. You would pray quietly beside their bed. There were no hospitals as we understand them now. Care happened at home, and this closeness carried risk. Neighbors began to vanish. Not dramatically, not with fanfare. One day you see the cooper repairing a barrel outside his shop. The next day, the shutters remain closed. A small wooden mark appears on the door. Weeks later, a new family moves in, or perhaps no one does. Records suggest that in some regions, between one-third and one-half of the population perished during the Black Death. The numbers are vast, almost difficult to hold in the mind. But for you, it would not be numbers. It would be faces. It would be the silence in the bakery where laughter once echoed. It would be the empty stool in church. Authorities attempted measures that, in hindsight, resemble early quarantine. Ships arriving at certain ports were required to wait before docking. In some towns, households with illness were marked or temporarily isolated. The word quarantine itself would later derive from the Italian quaranta giorni, 40 days. But enforcement varied. Understanding was incomplete. Life continued, even as it narrowed. You would still need bread, water, firewood. The rhythm of daily survival did not stop. You wake. You fetch water from a communal well. You stand in line, exchanging cautious glances. You knead dough. You sweep the threshold. You mend clothing by the light of a small window. You pause when the bell tolls again. And at night, you lie awake. Not always in fear. Sometimes simply in thought. You might wonder whether the illness is punishment, or test, or random misfortune. Clergy preached repentance. Some groups marched through towns in acts of public penance. Others sought scapegoats, tragically targeting minority communities in misguided attempts to explain suffering. Uncertainty can be heavy, and yet humans adapt. After some months, markets slowly regain life. Surviving workers find their labor suddenly more valuable. Fields lie fallow for lack of hands. Wages rise in certain regions. Social structures begin, quietly, to shift. But you would not see the grand arc of history. You would see only today, the narrow street, the wooden beams, the slow curl of smoke from a chimney. You would notice how the air feels in the early morning, cool against your face. You would notice how the church bell sounds different at dusk than at noon. You would notice how your own breathing becomes something you are suddenly aware of. In truth, surviving a week in such a town would require resilience. Physical, emotional, spiritual. Clean water is uncertain. Medical knowledge is limited. Fear moves like a shadow along the walls. And yet, people did survive. They baked bread. They fell in love. They rebuilt. The plague was devastating, yes, but it did not erase humanity. It revealed its fragility and its persistence. As the sun sets over the town, casting long golden lines across timbered houses, you step back toward the gate. The bell tolls once more in the distance. Not hurried, not frantic, just steady. In that steady rhythm, we begin to shift our focus away from the narrow lanes and toward a different kind of shelter. Far from this town, in the city of Avignon, a man in white robes contemplates the same spreading illness. But from within thick palace walls, And as we leave the marketplace behind, we will gently follow that path.
As we leave the narrow streets of the plague town behind, we travel south. The roads are long, dusty in summer, and heavy with mud in winter. Messengers move slowly along them, carrying letters sealed in wax. News travels at the pace of a horse's steady gait, and the news they carry again and again is the same. The sickness has spread. Our destination is not Rome, but Avignon, a walled city along the Rhine River. In the 14th century, the papacy resided here in what historians call the Avignon papacy. The palace rises above the town like a pale stone fortress. Its towers are solid, its windows narrow, its halls echoing. Inside these walls lives a man burdened with spiritual authority over much of Western Christendom. His name is Pope Clement VI. Imagine him not as a distant icon, but as a human figure seated at a heavy wooden desk. Wax candles flicker beside him. The air smells faintly of parchment and smoke. Letters from across Europe are stacked before him. Reports of entire villages emptied, monasteries half abandoned, bishops lost to fever. The scale of the crisis is difficult to comprehend. Unlike the townspeople we have just observed, Clement possesses access to information from far-reaching regions. Messengers arrive from France, from Italy, from the German states, from England. The reports differ in detail, but not in tone. Illness, fear, loss, and so. In 1348, Clement faces a profound question. How does a spiritual leader respond to something that no one understands? One of his first acts is theological. Many across Europe interpret the plague as divine punishment. Some preach that it is retribution for sin. Others suggest it marks the approaching end of days. Anxiety feeds speculation. Speculation feeds unrest. Clement, however, issues papal bulls, formal declarations, stating that the plague is not caused by the sins of specific groups or communities. In particular, he condemns violence against Jewish communities, who in several regions were falsely accused of poisoning wells. You can imagine the weight of that decision. In times of fear, people seek explanations. They look for certainty. Sometimes they look for someone to blame. Clement's declarations do not erase violence. Everywhere, tragically, persecutions still occur in various cities, but his words offer protection where his influence reaches. Then Avignon itself, he provides refuge to Jewish residents under papal protection. It is a quiet but significant stance. Now imagine the palace during the height of the plague. Avignon, like many cities, is not spared. Illness enters the streets below the papal residence. Clergy fall ill. Servants weaken. The sound of church bells carries upward through stone corridors. Clement does not flee. Instead, historical accounts describe him remaining within the palace, surrounded, somewhat unusually, by large fires kept burning in his chambers. At the time, it was believed that fire purified the air, driving away harmful vapors. The warmth would have been intense, especially in summer. Yet, he remained seated between these flames, conducting papal duties. Picture the scene quietly, heavy curtains drawn, firelight casting long shadows on pale walls. Clerks standing at a respectful distance, ink drying slowly on official documents. Outside, funeral processions move steadily through the streets. Inside, governance continues. Clement grants general absolution to those who die of plague, a significant spiritual assurance. In an era when confession and last rites are central to Christian life, the fear of dying without sacramental preparation weighs heavily on believers. By extending absolution broadly, Clement offers comfort across distances he cannot physically reach. It is an administrative response, but also an emotional one. The papal court itself shrinks. Some cardinals die, others withdraw. The rhythm of palace life slows. Feasts become quieter. Corridors echo more than usual. Even within fortified walls, uncertainty seeps through. You might imagine Clement walking along the palace ramparts in the evening. The Rhine River glimmers below. Smoke rises from the city's hearts. Somewhere beyond the walls, another bell tolls. He cannot command the disease to stop. He cannot fully explain its origin, but he can attempt to maintain stability, spiritual, political, administrative. Under his leadership, Avignon becomes a place where plague victims from surrounding areas are sometimes buried in consecrated ground, including large mass graves blessed to ensure proper rites. These burials are not described in vivid detail in our telling tonight, only as solemn acts of farewell, repeated many times. There's a certain steadiness in repetition. Prayers spoken again and again. Candles lit. Documents sealed. The historian, looking back, may debate Clement's motivations, whether his actions were primarily compassionate, politically calculated, or both. Leadership, after all, is rarely simple. But what remains clear is that amid widespread panic, he did not publicly endorse scapegoating. He did not abandon his post, and that, in itself, shapes history. Beyond Avignon, Europe changes. Labor shortages shift economic structures. Survivors negotiate higher wages. Landowners struggle to maintain previous systems. Social mobility, once limited, expands in subtle ways. The plague, devastating as it is, quietly alters the medieval world's foundations. Clement lives until 1352. Surviving the worst waves of the outbreak. His papacy becomes associated not only with opulence, for he was known as a patron of the arts and architecture, but also with this moment of extraordinary crisis. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the scratch of his quill against parchment, a measured sound, a small human effort against vast uncertainty. And now, as the fires in Avignon's palace burn low, we allow ourselves to drift forward in time. The plague, years pass. Europe rebuilds. Its generations are born who did not witness the first wave. Yet strange events continue to ripple through medieval society. In the summer of 1518, in the city of Strasbourg, something unusual begins. A woman steps into the street. Tant starts to dance. And she does not stop. We will move there next, gently, curiously, to explore one of history's quiet mysteries. Let us move forward now, slowly, more than a century after the first great wave of the Black Death. The year is 1518. The city is Strasbourg, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, Nestled beside the gentle curve of the Rhine River, timber-framed houses line the streets. Market stalls cluster in the squares. Church spires rise above tiled rooftops. Life here, like in so many European towns, follows a steady rhythm of trade, worship, and seasonal labor. And then, in July, something unusual begins. A woman, her name recorded in some sources as Frau Trofia, steps into the street. She begins to dance. At first, it might seem harmless, perhaps eccentric, perhaps a fleeting expression of joy or distress. But she does not stop. Hours pass, then days. Her feet move in repetitive patterns. Her arms lift and fall. She appears unable or unwilling to rest. Within a week, others join her. 2, then 10, then dozens. They dance in the heat of summer sunlight. They dance through fatigue. They dance despite blistered feet and trembling limbs. Observers describe faces strained, expressions distant. The movement continues, steady and relentless. The city authorities are perplexed. This event would later be called the Dancing Plague of 1518. It was not the only episode of collective dancing recorded in medieval and early modern Europe, but it remains one of the most well documented. Imagine standing at the edge of the square. The air is warm. The scent of bread drifts from a nearby bakery. A blacksmith's hammer rings faintly in the background. And in the center of it all, people move in an almost trance-like rhythm. There is no music, no festival, only the steady shuffling of feet against stone. City leaders, uncertain how to respond, initially assumed that the dancers must simply dance the affliction out of their bodies. Some accounts suggest that musicians were even hired to accompany them, believing structured rhythm might bring resolution. Instead, the numbers grow. At its height, some chronicles claim that hundreds participated, though exact figures remain debated by historians. The physical toll was undeniable. People collapsed from exhaustion. Some reportedly lost their lives from strain, dehydration, or underlying conditions worsened by the ordeal. We do not dwell on the specifics tonight, only on the stillness that followed when a body could no longer continue. Why did this happen? That question has echoed through centuries. One explanation suggests ergot poisoning, a fungus that can grow on damp rye and produce compounds affecting the nervous system. Ingested unknowingly through bread, it might cause convulsions or hallucinations. Yet many scholars note that ergot poisoning typically produces different symptoms, often far more chaotic and less coordinated than sustained rhythmic dancing. Another theory centers on what modern historians call mass psychogenic illness. Strasbourg, in 1518, had endured years of hardship, famine, disease, economic strain. Stress accumulated quietly in bodies and minds, a society deeply shaped by religious belief. Collective anxiety may have manifested physically. There was also a spiritual interpretation. Some believed the dancers were afflicted by Saint Vitus, a Christian saint associated in folklore with nervous disorders. The condition was sometimes called Saint Vitus's dance. Pilgrimages were organized. Dancers were taken to shrines, where rituals were performed in hopes of relief, and eventually the dancing stopped. Not with a grand conclusion, not with a clear explanation, okay? It simply subsided. The square returned to its ordinary sounds. Vendors calling out prices, children laughing, carts rolling over cobblestones. But the memory lingered. The dancing plague reminds us that medieval life was not defined only by war or epidemic. It was also shaped by mystery events that defy simple understanding. In a world without modern psychiatry or neurology, the line between body and spirit was interpreted differently. Illness could be physical, divine, communal, or some combination of all three. And Strasbourg was not alone in its strangeness. Across medieval Europe, other mysteries quietly unfolded. In England, the village of Ayam would later voluntarily isolate itself during a 17th century plague outbreak to prevent spreading illness to neighboring communities. Though outside our immediate century, it reflects a recurring theme: ordinary people making extraordinary collective decisions in times of disease. In Italy, strange reports described individuals who claimed visions during outbreaks, some comforting, others unsettling. Chroniclers recorded comets in the sky, interpreting them as omens. Earthquakes were linked to divine displeasure. The natural and supernatural intertwined seamlessly in medieval imagination. Imagine yourself living in such a time. A comet streaks across the night sky. Its tail glows faintly. There is no telescope to explain its orbit. It is simply a sign of what you cannot be sure. You hear that people in a distant city have begun dancing uncontrollably. You have never seen it yourself, but the rumor travels along trade routes, passed from merchant to merchant, growing slightly softer or slightly sharper with each retelling. Mystery was not an interruption to medieval life. It was woven into it. Even disease itself remained mysterious. Though the worst waves of the Black Death had passed by 1518, smaller outbreaks continued for centuries. People recognized patterns: proximity to illness, crowded living conditions, but they did not yet understand bacteria, vectors, incubation periods. Knowledge moved slowly, like the tolling of a bell. And yet, even amid uncertainty, communities endured. They rebuilt markets. They repaired bridges. They celebrated feast days. They illuminated manuscripts with gold leaf and delicate pigments. They told stories by candlelight. The dancing plague fades into the background of history, leaving behind questions rather than answers. But perhaps that is fitting. History is not only a record of certainties, it's also a record of wonder, of events that remind us how complex the human mind and body can be. As the sun sets over Strasbourg, the square grows quiet. The stones cool beneath the evening air. The last dancer has long since returned home. A church bell marks the hour, calm, measured, familiar. Hey, and now we turn toward a place where rhythm was carefully controlled, where mystery was contemplated not in public squares, but in cloistered silence. Beyond the noise of markets and the uncertainty of streets stood the monastery, its walls thick, schedule precise, its purpose steady. Let us pass gently through its wooden doors. As we leave the open square of Strasbourg behind, we walk along a quieter road. The countryside stretches softly around us, fields divided by hedgerows, Small streams moving patiently through grass, distant hills fading into blue-gray haze. K, rising from the landscape with a deliberate calm, stands a monastery. Its walls are thick stone, its windows narrow and arched. There is no marketplace noise here, no wandering livestock, no crowded alleyways. The gate opens not into a bustling street, but into a cloistered courtyard, a square garden enclosed on all sides by covered walkways. The air feels different inside these walls, still, ordered, measured. Imagine yourself entering as a novice monk in the 14th century. You are not fleeing the world entirely, but you are stepping away from its chaos, from plague bells and anxious rumor, into a life governed by structure. The day begins long before sunrise. In darkness, a bell sounds softly through the stone corridors. It is not the urgent toll of plague, but a steady, predictable signal. The first prayer service, Matins, calls the brothers from their narrow beds. You rise in silence. There's little furniture in your cell, a simple cot, a wooden stool, perhaps a small shelf for a manuscript. The air is cool, often cold in winter. You wrap your woolen habit more tightly around your shoulders and move down the corridor with quiet footsteps. The chapel is dimly lit by candles. Shadows flicker along the vaulted ceiling. The chanting begins, low, rhythmic, unhurried. Latin words rise and fall in unison. Okay? The sound is neither dramatic nor theatrical. It is steady, almost like breathing. Okay? This rhythm shapes the entire day. After matins comes lauds at dawn. Then prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, 7 or 8 services, depending on the order. Time itself is divided by prayer. Between these services, work fills the hours. You might tend a garden within the monastery walls, rows of herbs carefully cultivated, sage, thyme, rosemary, mint. These serve both culinary and medicinal purposes. You kneel in the soil, the scent of crushed leaves rising gently as your fingers brush past them. Or perhaps you work in the scriptorium. This is a long room lined with desks, positioned near windows for natural light. Each desk holds parchment stretched taut, small pots of ink, quills trimmed carefully by hand. The scratching sound of writing fills the space, soft, repetitive, almost hypnotic. Here, manuscripts are copied, religious texts, certainly, but also works of classical philosophy, medical treatises, histories. Without monasteries, much ancient knowledge might have quietly disappeared during turbulent centuries. Imagine dipping your quill into ink, carefully forming each letter. There is no rush. Precision matters more than speed. An illuminated manuscript may take months, even years, to complete. Gold leaf is applied delicately. Blues are ground from lapis lazuli, a precious stone imported from distant lands. Reds come from crushed insects or minerals. Each page becomes a work of devotion. Silence is often observed during these hours. Not absolute silence, but restrained speech. Words are used sparingly. Communication happens through small gestures, nods, shared glances. Meals are simple. Bread, vegetable stew, occasionally fish. Meat is rare, depending on the order's rules. The monks eat together in a refectory, long wooden tables arranged in rows. They eat. One brother reads aloud from scripture or a devotional text. Chewing is quiet. Listening is constant. You would notice the contrast immediately if you had come from the town we clearly remember. No vendors calling out prices. No animals wandering through streets. No sudden rumors spreading from door to door. Instead, there is repetition. And repetition brings a kind of calm. During times of plague, monasteries were not entirely immune. Illness could enter through travelers or through brothers who served surrounding communities. Some monasteries suffered severe losses. Entire communities of monks sometimes dwindled dramatically. But within these walls, there was also protection. Isolation was part of monastic life already. Limited contact with the outside world reduced exposure in certain cases. The thick stone buildings, the structured routines, the emphasis on cleanliness in food preparation all contributed in varying degrees to a sense of containment. Imagine standing in the cloister garden at midday. Sunlight filters down into the square courtyard. Bees drift lazily among flowers. A fountain at the center provides a soft, continuous murmur of water. You walk slowly along the covered walkway, reading a small psalter in your hands. The world beyond the walls continues. Markets reopen. Fields are replanted. Governments shift. The rhythm remains steady. Wake, pray, work, eat, pray again, sleep. This repetition offers psychological refuge in uncertain times. When the outside world feels unpredictable, a structured schedule can feel like an anchor. Monasteries also served as centers of care. Some maintained infirmaries for the sick. Both monks and occasionally lay people could rest. Herbal remedies were prepared carefully. Beds were arranged neatly. Care was quiet and methodical, not miraculous, not dramatic, just attentive. You might spend an afternoon illuminating the letter B at the start of a psalm. Curling vines of paint extend from its edges. Small gold dots catch the light. The detail demands focus, and in that focus, worry softens. The plague years altered monasteries too, with fewer laborers outside. Some monasteries acquired land, others struggled with declining numbers of new novices. Economic shifts reshaped their influence, but through it all, the bells continued to mark the hours, not as signals of death, but as markers of prayer. As evening approaches, Vespers fills the chapel with a warm candlelight. The chanting is slower now. Lower, the day winds gently downward. You return to your cell. The stone walls hold the day's warmth for a short while before night air cools them again. You lie on your narrow bed. Outside, beyond thick walls, the countryside rests under starlight. The world has known plague. It has known mystery. It has known dancing in the streets and fires in papal chambers. And yet, here, within monastery walls, life settles into calm cycles of devotion and work. The rhythm of their lives continues, steady, measured, persistent. As we step back from the monastery gates, we carry with us the memory of 4 very different spaces. It's a crowded town where uncertainty moved through narrow streets and bells marked loss. The palace in Avignon, where leadership met crisis with parchment and firelight. The square in Strasbourg, where mystery unfolded in unexpected motion. And the cloistered garden, where structure and prayer created refuge. The medieval world was not defined solely by catastrophe, though catastrophe left its mark. It was shaped equally by routine, by bread baked each morning, by manuscripts copied line by line, by bells that rang whether in sorrow or in prayer. If you imagine yourself there now, walking slowly through those old streets, you might notice something familiar beneath the difference. Human persistence, even in uncertainty, even in fear, even in mystery. And perhaps as you rest in the comfort of your present surroundings. Clean water nearby, steady walls around you. Medicine understood in ways unimaginable in the 14th century. You can feel a gentle contrast. The past was fragile, but it endured. And now, as the final bell of our journey tolls softly in the distance, you can allow your thoughts to slow. The streets grow quiet, the palace fires dim, the dancers rest, the monastery settles into silence, and you too may drift gently into rest, carried by the steady rhythm of history, the quiet knowledge that through every age, life continues. Sleep well.